You are not supposed to be alone. Right now, your species is the only human species on Earth. That feels normal. It feels like the way things have always been. But for roughly 300,000 years, it wasn't. You shared this planet with at least 8 other kinds of humans. They walked, hunted, made tools, buried their dead, and raised their children. And then, one by one, they vanished. Every single one of them. Except you. Why? 300,000 years ago, the world was crowded with humans. Not your kind of human. Not exactly. But human enough that if you passed one on a trail, your brain would register something deeply familiar. In 2017, paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques and his team published findings from Jebel Irhoud, a site in Morocco, pushing the earliest known Homo sapiens fossils back to roughly 300,000 years ago. That date matters, because at that exact moment in time, your species was just one of many. Neanderthals had already been living in Europe and Western Asia for over 200,000 years. They were stocky, powerfully built, with brains slightly larger than yours. They made sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire, and buried their dead with care. In some caves, archaeologists have found pigment residues and shell ornaments, signs that Neanderthals engaged in symbolic behavior. They were not the brutes your textbooks once described. How do we miss that for so long? Further east, in the cold mountains of Siberia, another species left barely any physical trace at all. In 2010, Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology sequenced DNA from a tiny finger bone found in Denisova cave. That bone belonged to a previously unknown human species, the Denisovans. Almost everything we know about them comes from ancient DNA rather than fossils. But what the DNA revealed was staggering. Denisovans ranged across vast stretches of Asia, and they interbred with your ancestors. On the Indonesian island of Flores, something stranger was happening. Homo floresiensis, discovered in Liang Bua Cave in 2003, stood barely a meter tall. Nicknamed the Hobbit, this tiny human species made stone tools, hunted small elephants called stegodon, and survived on a remote island until roughly 50,000 years ago. How did a human species end up so small? Island dwarfism. The same evolutionary pressure that shrinks elephants and deer on isolated islands apparently worked on humans too. In the Philippines, another surprise was waiting. In 2019, paleoanthropologist Florent Detroit and his team announced a new species, Homo luzonensis, based on fossils from Calao Cave on the island of Luzon. The bones were small, with a strange mix of ancient and modern features. Curved finger bones that suggested tree climbing alongside teeth that looked surprisingly modern. At least 67,000 years old, this species had been living on an island that required a sea crossing to reach. That means some form of watercraft. That means planning. Deep in South Africa, yet another human was hiding underground. In 2013, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger led a team of slender-bodied scientists through a barely passable crack in the Rising Star Cave system near Johannesburg. Inside a nearly inaccessible chamber, they found over 1,500 bone fragments belonging to a new species, Homo naledi. Naledi had a brain roughly 1/3 the size of yours. But the placement of the bodies deep in a pitch-dark chamber, accessible only through a narrow chute, led Berger to a provocative conclusion. Homo naledi may have been deliberately disposing of their dead. Ritual behavior, from a species with a brain the size of an orange. The dating placed these fossils between 230,000 and 330,000 years ago, right when your species was being born. And these are only the species we have found. Homo erectus, one of the most successful human species ever, had been roaming Africa and Asia for nearly 2 million years and likely still lingered in Southeast Asia while your ancestors were taking their first steps. Homo heidelbergensis, tall and robust, walked through Europe and Africa and may have been the common ancestor linking you to the Neanderthals. DNA studies have even revealed ghost populations, entire lineages of archaic humans whose bones we have never found, but whose genetic fingerprints survive inside modern African populations. So picture this. 100,000 years ago, Africa, Europe, Asia, and the islands of Southeast Asia are each home to different human species. Neanderthals in the cold forests of Europe, Denisovans in the highlands of Tibet and the jungles of Southeast Asia, Homo floresiensis on Flores, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, possibly the last Homo erectus clinging on in Java, and your ancestors, Homo sapiens, still mostly in Africa, beginning to push outward. The planet is a mosaic of humanity. And then, between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago, every one of those other species disappears. The fossil record goes silent. The caves are empty. Only Homo sapiens remains. What happened? You probably expect a simple story. Your ancestors were smarter. They had language. They outcompete everyone else. But the evidence does not support a single clean explanation. Neanderthals had large brains and complex technology. Denisovans adapted to extreme high-altitude environments that would challenge modern humans. Homo floresiensis survived for hundreds of thousands of years on an island with limited resources. These were not failed experiments. They were successful species. Climate played a role. The late Pleistocene was brutal. Ice ages expanded and contracted. Forests became grasslands. Coastlines shifted by hundreds of kilometers. Small, isolated populations are vulnerable to climate shocks. But your ancestors faced those same pressures. Something else was different about Homo sapiens. Some researchers point to network size. Your ancestors appear to have maintained larger, more interconnected social groups. Robin Dunbar's work on social brain size suggests that Homo sapiens could manage relationships with roughly 150 individuals, far more than most other species could track. Larger networks meant faster innovation, more efficient trade, and better survival odds during environmental crises. When one group's hunting ground dried up, they had allies 3 valleys over. Others point to symbolic thinking, art, language, ritual, the ability to share complex ideas across generations. To teach a child not just how to make a spear, but why. To tell a story about a hunt that happened before the child was born. To plan for a season that had not arrived yet. But here is the twist you did not expect. Your ancestors did not simply replace those other species. They absorbed them. If you have European or Asian ancestry, roughly 1 to 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. If you have Melanesian or Australian Aboriginal ancestry, up to 6% of your DNA is Denisovan. Those ancient humans are not entirely gone. They live inside your cells. Your immune system, your ability to process certain fats, your adaptation to high altitude or cold climates. Some of those traits came directly from species you thought went extinct. Pablo's Nobel Prize-winning work on ancient DNA proved something the fossil record alone never could. The boundaries between human species were not walls. They were doors. Your ancestors walked through them. So the next time you feel like being human means being separate from nature, from the past, from other ways of being, remember this. For 300,000 years, being human was not one thing. It was many things. Many bodies, many brains, many ways of surviving. 9 known species, at minimum. And the one that made it carried pieces of the others forward. You are not supposed to be alone. And in a way, you still are not.